Hi, I'm Katie Crane and this is Katie. Thanks for joining us. We're going to be going through specifically some reformer exercises today in supine for you to understand better how to cue your client to connect with their core when they're moving. A lot of what we're going to be doing today will also translate to the chair and any of the other Pilates equipment. Over the course of these next 4 classes, we will be touching on supine, quadruped, seated, standing and prone. So I'm going to get Katie to lay on down. I've just got this on one light spring so that you know. And when I first am working with a client, I've probably seen them for a one-on-one anyway, so I know what their interpretation of their core is to some degree. Some things that I want to be thinking about or considering is, have they had any abdominal surgery, for example cesarean, or we work a lot with cancer patients, so have they had any abdominal surgery that may be inhibiting their core structure? And that's going to relate to the workshop that we talked about when I had the skeleton. Also, have they had a baby, and if they did have a baby, was it Caesar or was it natural? And do they have any other pain in their body? So remember I talked about that these deep core muscles are inhibited by pain, right? So if they do have any pain in their body, then those deep core muscles may not be switching on the way that they're designed to switch on, and that's when we come into that issue of people bracing. So sometimes I need to teach my client how to relax or switch off some of those external muscles like back extensors, big glute muscles, six pack and oblique, how to switch them off so that we can get into those deep muscles. So I've started with the foot bar down, just one spring on, and I'm going to talk about this also in the mat class. This is the type of stuff that I send my people home with, but how to bring your legs into tabletop. So Katie, if you go ahead and pop your hands onto the front of your pelvis. The front of your pelvis, I talk about them as being your headlights, it's your ASIS. So go ahead and tilt your pubic bone towards you, and then tilt your pubic bone away. When you tilt your pubic bone towards you, you're going to feel your back imprint into the bed. When you tilt your pubic bone away, your back comes off of the bed. So you want to do that a few times, and your customers or your client's neutral spine is somewhere in between that position, that they're not having to force that. Everybody's going to be a little bit different, and that's okay. What I want to know is that my client does not feel the tension in their back when they're in their neutral spine. Quite often I have heard instructors say, you know, make sure there's a hand space between your back and the bed. That may or may not be appropriate for everybody. Some people, if they have a very big natural curve in their spine, they're going to have a lot of space between the back and their bed. Some people are not going to have much space at all. So it's wherever you are comfortable that you're just not overactive. Now we're going to start to learn how to bring our legs to tabletop. So let's go through what is a very common tabletop. So go ahead, take a deep inhale, exhale as you bring one leg to about a 90-degree angle. So do it the old way, and inhale as you lower, right? That's a really common way. Now let's do the other side. So I think of that as lifting the leg from the hip flexor. It's not that I hate hip flexors, but if we can get them not to do so much work in this really foundational stuff, then once we get to the fun stuff, for example teaser, then that's when we really need hip flexors to be overworking or working hard. They're not going to be fatigued. So we'll go through this in the mat class as well, but for me to get your legs to come to tabletop, I want you to feel that when you're lifting your leg, there's a little bit of space in the hip socket. So it's almost like you're kicking a ball with your shin. Now Katie knows how to do this because we practice that a lot in our studio, and we see some great results with our clients. So you're going to start to send the leg away from you and then bring it probably up to about a 70-degree angle about there. So the way that I think about it, a lot of us talk about champagne glasses or coffee cups. Normally the coffee cup would be sitting on a tabletop, right? But in our class, the coffee is going to be going down the leg onto her belly, right? Very, very important. What I've created here is better space in the joints, so the hip is not so jammed up. The knee has a little bit of space, and the core is having to work much more. Now Katie, go ahead and bring your other leg to tabletop. Beautiful. right? A lot of core control. If my client cannot do that without their back extensors taking over, I would get them to pop their feet down here, right? If they're still struggling with that, you could give your client a ball underneath the knee and pop the ball here. Yeah, I don't have a ball with me, but you get the idea, right? Okay, so hold your legs to tabletop there, and I'm just going to put this bar just up 2 clicks. So that may be a little bit lower than what you're used to when you're doing footwork. I'm not saying that down the track you can't bring them in more or put the foot bar up higher, but at the moment I'm teaching my customer or my client the best way to find those bony positions or the placement. And if I bring the bar up too much, then it's like their legs are too far up towards their torso. Now, we talked about in the workshop with Hank the skeleton how those deep tummy muscles have to activate with that whole back line. Remember, the back line comes from the Achilles all the way out the back of the leg, all the way up through the back of the spine. So today I'm going to give you some ideas that you can play around with your students to get them to activate that whole back sling in conjunction with those deep tummy muscles. Now, Katie understands her neutral body position. She's in that neutral body position. So I want you to flex your feet back a little bit. Now, the sweet spot on your heel when you're doing your footwork is down here, that I'm just at the very forward position of my heel. What I'm looking at is where the heel is placed on the foot bar, directly in line with where the bone inserts into the foot. Does that make sense? Now I want you to keep that shape and feel that you're pulling your heels down into my hands. When you pull your heels down into my hands, you're going to feel the backs of your legs switch on. So that's part of that longitudinal sling in the back of the body. Now you have to keep that working while you push the bed on out. So go ahead, push the bed on out and pull the bed on in. Just feel that tension. I know that I've got the stopper away from you further than what you're used to it, and pull the bed on in. Important that I get my student to understand the connection of their hamstrings with their abdominals. I don't talk about switching on the abdominals. I talk more about how that back sling should be working and the placement of the feet. If I've got somebody who's really struggling with that, I can put my hands underneath here, and you're just pulling your heels down into my hands the whole time. Now, I start with a very light spring if I haven't worked with anybody before, and I actually want them to feel that they're working just as much on the way out as the way in, which translates to, it's almost like you're pulling the bed in by pulling your heels towards your sits bones and then pushing out. So you might start this with an inhale to press on out and an exhale to drag back in. It's okay at this stage if your customer or your client is struggling to know whether or not their deep tummy muscles are working, especially if they come back from surgery or if they're in pain. All I'm trying to do here is get them to move well and actually allow for those back extensors and for those glutes to relax, which is why I've got it on a light setting. Once I know that they're successful at doing that, then I can start to load up, and the focus of course can come more into what their legs are doing. So you can do exactly the same. But even when you're loaded up, you still want them to get that dragging the heels down as they're pushing out and in. So I'm just going to load you up a little bit more. I'm still looking at my student being able to maintain good neutral alignment, but now you're going to take a deep inhale to prepare. Exhale as you press the bed on out, and inhale as you bring the bed back in. Good. Soften the toes, go again. Exhale as you press on out, inhale as you come back in. Now, always your student will feel that when you're going from that very light spring, I did it on one red, you could do it on one blue the first time. they'll feel that this is very, very heavy, but then their legs will get used to it. You want to make sure that it's not just the quads or the front of the legs activating. So there's still that sense of dragging the heels down towards the sits bones all the time, or down towards the springs. We know that if that whole back line is working in the body, then the deep tummy muscles are probably doing their job. And just by focusing on that, it's a really good way of getting your student out of the habit of bracing or over-activating their superficial muscles, so their six-pack and their oblique. And you can do that with all of your foot positions. I'm not going to go through them because you know all your foot positions. We're going to go ahead and pop your feet in the straps and think about that same concept. Now, feet in straps may or may not be appropriate for somebody who is in pain. So let's go through this for now, and then I'm going to show you some strategies that you could modify your feet in straps for somebody who is either in pain, has very low pelvic floor tone, or has newly come back from abdominal surgery, okay? I can also talk about that same concept of the back of the body working. Do you see where I've got the feet in straps, right? My straps are at the bottom of the arch of the foot, similar to when I had my feet on the foot bar. My strap has to be at the bottom of the foot, which is pretty much in line with where that bone of the foot of the leg goes into the foot. Now go ahead and bend your knees to our new tabletop, so our 70-degree angle, there. The first thing that I tell my student is that you know that your legs are in good position because the straps are not touching the front of your legs. If the straps are touching the front of your legs, then your feet are down too low. Especially if you're on one of these beds that is on the floor, it's a little bit different when your bed is elevated, right? But for these reformers on the floor, definitely that is true. Now same, I don't let my student bring their knees in too far, right? I want to keep space in the hip socket, so I'm a little bit away from the hip socket. That's not going to be true forever. This is all foundational or fundamental stuff, right? So when I've got my student laying here, I can use my hands, and Katie is pressing down into my hands with her heels. That activates that back line and in turn activates the core. Imagine that you've got now a wall straight in front of you, and you're going to slide your feet up the wall and then drag your heels down the wall. Good. I would inhale to go up and exhale as you come down. It's okay if the bed moves a little bit. What I'm trying to get is ultimately activation of the hamstrings. We all know from working with students that it can be a very difficult part of the body to get. So if I can teach this in the foundational part of my class, then this sets my customer and my clients up for success long term, right? It's okay if I don't get it the first couple of times, because I'm going to rinse and repeat over and over and over again. And again, I have not spoken about switching on tummy tone, right? When my body is in correct shape or correct alignment, then my muscles will be doing the job that they're designed to do at an appropriate tone. So this prevents my client who has been bracing from doing that. So I'm reteaching that over-activation or that compensatory pattern and taking their awareness into something else and something that's very, very new for them that they have to really focus on. Once I've done something like this, then I might do my normal froggies, exhale as you press away, inhale as you pull back. My focus is still on pressing down into my hands with your feet the whole time. So I can sit here with my student and give them that feedback, but long term I might give them cues like, imagine you're pressing down onto a ball the whole time, right? And you can do any of your foot positions. You can go into your circles. Obviously, the further I go away from my midsection, the more challenging that's going to be in my deep tummy muscles in general, right? So my focus obviously is on maintaining the neutral body shape while I'm going into my ranges. Now, if I'm working with somebody where it's too much for them to have their feet in the straps, and that can be really common if I'm working with somebody who has been in pain for a long time or is at the acute phase of their recovery from injury, then I can shorten the lever, right? So if my leg is a lever, this is a very long lever here. If I go ahead and pop the straps onto the back of the knees, yeah, and then just let your foot dangle down. There you go. Yeah, let's do the same on the other side. There you go. For most people, that's going to be pretty comfortable, right? Now, Katie can still focus on maintaining that neutral body shape, which is partly the job of our deep abdominals and that whole structure that we talked about in the last workshop. Then we can do similar types of movement, but instead of leading from her feet, she's just leading from her knees. So today we're just going to push the feet down towards the springs and then come back up. Good. Exhale as you press on down. Inhale as you come back up. Go again. Now I would have the option, of course, of putting a chi ball underneath the knee to get that hamstring activation. Or I could cue for Katie to imagine there's a ball behind her knee and she's squeezing the ball, squeezing her heels towards her sits bones. I can also go into my circles, so bring your legs on up, separate, come around and down. So you can see the movement principle is the same from the hip socket. I'm maintaining neutral body shape, a fantastic way for my student to feel their deep tummy muscles because I've shortened the lever. It really brings that concentrated focus into those deep tummy muscles. As they get stronger and even more confident, more comfortable, then I can go ahead and pop the straps back onto the feet and do exactly the same exercises, right? So it's really important, especially if I am working with somebody either who is really struggling with some of these concepts, is in pain, or is newly back from having a baby or having surgery. It's important that when I do start to advance them, they're very familiar with the movement that I'm doing with them, right? So that then they feel that progression of success. The concepts stay the same, but I'm just progressing them. To take your foot on out of there, you want to take this foot out first. You can bring that knee in towards your chest. Yeah, pop that foot onto the bar, up. Yeah, if you push into the bar a little bit, then you can take the other foot out. Okay, so when I'm working with abdominal understanding, deep core control, personally I always start with the lower limbs, simply because most people are walking in and out of the studio. So to me that's functional. You don't have to start with that, that's just how I see things. I also want to start to move on to them understanding how their arms work in space. Now, if I've got somebody, let's imagine that I've got somebody who was able to do all of that without their back extensors taking over or without feeling any pain, right? Let's assume that that is true. We're going to pop your hands in straps, Katie. So next to your ears are your straps. Keep your feet where they are for now. Pop your hands in the long straps, it just looks better for me. You can opt, long straps, short straps, right? I just like the aesthetics while I'm doing this for long straps. Okay, so what I'm looking at here is that the shoulders have a little bit of space between the shoulder rest and the shoulder girdle, so you're not jammed up. My student is able to maintain good neutral position the whole time. You're not going to go anywhere to start with. I just want you to get a sense of pressing your hands into the straps without moving. When you press your hands into the straps without moving, you feel some muscles in your underarms activate, right? Ultimately, that's some of your deep shoulder muscles and probably your lats. I want you to maintain that feeling. I haven't asked you to switch any of that on. I'm just letting you know as a teacher what is happening. To my student, I just tell them what they have to do, which is press the hands into the straps that they feel tension, but the bed is not moving. Once you've got that, then we've already learned how to do a good tabletop. So you're going to slide the leg away, bring the leg to about a 70-degree angle and the other one. Good. I check in on here. You know, this is where you're probably feeling a little bit of tummy tone that your back isn't taking over, right? If my student needs a little bit of support, I could put a ball or balls underneath the knees here like so, yeah? But Katie's good. I know that Katie's good. This is a challenge for her. I want her to be challenged, but I want her to be successful. Now, we've talked about this before, but let's think of this concept here. The feet are flexed a little bit, and I'm pushing the heels down into my hand, right? So Katie is pressing down into my hand. What happens here is the hamstrings are now active. There's no point getting my core muscles to work without that back sling, because functionally, once I stand up, those guys need to be working together. So let's get it done now. Take a deep inhale there. Exhale as you press your arms down to your sides. You're leading with your little fingers. Katie knows this anyway. And then inhale as you come back up. Anytime you press down into the straps, you've got to also press down into my hands. Good. Once my student has done that a couple of times, I can go away from them, but you have to keep that happening. Now, I can see when I walk away if that is happening or not. If you've never tried this before, I can guarantee this is where I tell my students, you are getting your bang for your buck right here. This is why you pay what you do for Pilates, because there's a whole lot working all the time. Pilates is not about, you know, anchoring in on just one muscle group. It's about getting that full body integration in everything that we do. Now, you can go through all of your arm work here. What I do want you to recognize is what Katie is doing with her hands. So always when you're pushing down, I like you to push into your little fingers. See how that creates a spiral of my arm, instead of up and down with my hand flat this way, which if you tried that now, if I go up and down with my hands flat this way, that really jams up in my shoulder. It shortens in here. There's no space in my joint. When I do this, I feel space in my joints. Very, very important that we're always teaching what should be happening in those joints for long-term health. That applies in all of your arm work. So that's fine for somebody, or appropriate for somebody who is able to keep their legs in tabletop themselves, right? But the reality of it is a lot of our people really struggle with that when they're starting out. So I'm going to modify this for you as well. Let's go ahead and take your hands out of there, and we're going to pop your feet in the straps. So remembering that this is appropriate for somebody who struggles to keep their own legs in tabletop without those back extensors kicking in and taking over. So go ahead and pop your legs into your tabletop now. Much more supported here, so the straps are ultimately holding Katie's legs. I've got this on one red spring. If that's too light, because one red spring is what she was doing her arm work on, if it's too light, you could give them a little bit more support, so maybe 1.5, but just see how you go, because I'm trying to get Katie to the point where she can keep her own legs in tabletop and not rely on that spring. All right, so we're going to do the same arm movement. These are just 1 kilos. I don't need it to be super heavy. I might use 1.5 kilos, but that's about as heavy as I go. Similar to when you're doing your arms in straps, when you're learning them, it's never going to be all that heavy. So what I'm looking at is good joint placement through the lower limbs. Before you go anywhere, I just want you to separate your knees a little bit and get that sense of pressing your heels down into my hands. So when you press your heels down into my hands, remember that activates that longitudinal sling at the back of the body. Hamstrings are switching on, right? So from there, you're going to keep that happening. And today, I'm going to get you to take one arm out towards a T, about there, and then take that arm back. Other arm out towards a T. So you keep doing that while I talk you through it. You keep the heels pressing down into my arms. Eventually you get to the point where you can take your arms away and your student can maintain that connection without you having to be there. Now what's happening is as we take the arms out away from the torso, those deep stabilizers are working to keep your body in the right shape. As well as those deep stabilizers working, your student is also going to feel some oblique tone. Right, so it's a really nice way just for the bed to give your student tactile feedback. So tactile feedback is, knowing something against you, at the same time as understanding that when we move our arms, if we don't have the right support, then we lose that neutral body shape. So now let's go ahead and take both arms, not quite out to a T, let's do angel wing. So both arms go down to your sides and then out to a T. I prefer this to, like your normal, all the way out to a T, right? So if you go ahead and try that now, I'm going out. It shortens the space in the joint of the shoulder compared to what we call angel wing. So imagine my arms are up to the ceiling. I go down to my sides and out. It creates space in the shoulder girdle. Over the years, what I see, especially with Pilates teachers, is we do this so many times that then we end up with shoulder issues. So we're always trying to find more space or appropriate joint movement in everything that we do. This starts to teach her, eventually Katie's going to get strong enough that she can put her hands back in the straps, and this would be the precursor to her full arm circles, right? Beautiful, make that your last one. You can bring your arms back to the ceiling. You could go into your arm circles, you can do any arm movements you want, but just know that this gives her a little bit more support until she gets strong enough to be able to hold her own legs in tabletop, and it's a great way for getting that longitudinal sling to do the work. Let's take this foot on out of here. I've got one more exercise for you to play around with your students, hands in straps. One of the toughest movements I find to teach, and something that I often shy away from for a long time with my students, is chest lift, right? Just because I tend to see a lot of people with neck issues going on, and it's very difficult for us to do a really good chest lift without our neck and shoulders taking over. But if you have taught your student that pressing your heels down into my hands gets that whole back sling working, right? Then you've got good shape of your arm, so your tension is into the little finger rather than into the flat strap, so turned this way. Take a deep inhale, and as you exhale, press down into the straps, and as you press down into your straps, you're going to lift your head and chest. Off you go. Right, so right here, this is happening when you start. Once you're up into this shape, what I want you to feel is that you're pressing your legs into my hands this way, and you're pointing the toes. That's it, good. So ultimately, if you're in a flexed or a C shape, toes are pointed, legs are pulling in. If you're going down, you're going to press your heels back down into my hands, flex your feet. Good. Exhale as you lift on up, point your toes pressing into my hands. I can guarantee this really gets those tummy muscles working here. And inhale as you lower, press down into my hands and the heels of your feet. I'm going to take my arm away. I want you to do that yourself. Exhale as you lift, like you're pressing your knees in, scooping. Point the toes. Yep. Inhale as you lower. So that's a lot of complexity, right? I'm asking Katie to do a lot of different things at one time. But the beauty of that is, because I've taken the attention into what should be happening in her feet, she's probably not thinking about her neck and shoulders so much. Most of the time then, you find that your student can get appropriate tummy tone without bracing too much to go into that movement pattern. Let's do two more. Point the toes, pull the knees in at the same time. I know there's a lot going on. Inhale as you lower. Beautiful. Point the toes back. And exhale, last one. Exhale, point the toes. Good, beautiful. And inhale as you lower. When you're ready, you can place your feet on down. So there's some strategies for you to work with your students to make sure that they're starting to connect with those deep tummy muscles and also connect with that longitudinal sling. On the next session, we're going to go into some 4-point kneeling, but I want you to go away and practice that with your students. Start to use those different cues so that then when we get to things like 4-point kneeling, where the bed isn't giving our students so much feedback, they already have a very good understanding of where their body is in space. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.